Hi everybody, welcome to the official Shattered Illusions YouTube channel. My name is Lee Hershkowitz, I'm the author. For those of you who are new to this channel, I can just give you a little bit of background. Shattered Illusions was released in May from Full Court Press, an independent publishing company. I've been promoting it for about a year, and I thought it would be fun to read and discuss it with my readers. So we are going to be continuing today with a little bit of chapter 2. If you have your copy, feel free to read along. We're starting on page 17. This is it, just in case, you've been living under a rock and you don't know what it looks like. Alright, here we go. Chapter 2, Marco Santorini, Wednesday, August 22nd, 2007. Sometimes I wonder if I'm singular in my mindset. Surely that is a strange thing to wonder, for am I not unique in my train of thought? What about when my thoughts concern worldly matters? Are they then singular? Am I the only person in the world who can search deeply within the crevices of my soul for something that might not even exist? I have a deep love for the unknown, a passion for the romances of the imagination, for love that cannot be real, yet at the same time be alive in the most complicated and heartfelt way. The dangers in finding out that I am not wanted do not faze me. The pain of knowing that I cannot be loved in return do not sting me. Do you believe me? No, of course you don't, because you're thinking rationally. Rationality has never gotten me farther than certain disappointment, so I have learned to live quite nicely without it. My world has been turned upside down and inside out by a lack of politeness or logic. I have learned how to dive in without looking down at the consequences. Answer me this. Is love rational? Is it sane? Can it be tamed and sculpted like a piece of clay? Of course it can. When you love something, or someone, to a point where thinking about them makes you feel light and dizzy, all sense of reason flies out the window each time you open your mouth to speak, ends indeed at the first glance, the first hello. So, if you believe that I am irrational for loving something that is unknown to me, you are correct. I loved her from the moment I laid eyes on her. Her perfumed hair bounced past me as she hurried down the staircase and out the door, her composure light and welcoming, as if she was inviting me along on her daily journey. We were strangers, never a hello in passing or a wave, but we occasionally exchanged a friendly smile as she passed in the hall. Everything about her was breathtaking. Her wild, untamed orange hair, bright smile, and fresh blue eyes would cause my stomach to tie itself in knots. Her name was Andrea Jean, apartment 4A, just down the hall from me, yet completely unknown. We lived on the same floor for a year, and I never once had the courage to do more than smirk stupidly as she passed, with a look in her eyes as if she were on a top-secret mission. I felt a connection to her that I had never felt towards anyone else. You may think I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but I loved her. I knew all that time that, even if it didn't work out, I needed to be with her. The first time I saw her, I felt as if the heavens were smiling down on me, as if the sun had broken through a dark mass of clouds. I felt different, but a good different, the way one feels after a life-changing event. That's what it was, life-changing and completely irrational, though in my limited experience, romance is anything but rational. It was a week after I moved to New York. I was a fresh face on American soil, barely spoke any English, and was completely absorbed by the insanity of what this country had to offer. I'm not going to lie to you, I was taken aback. I had heard numerous stories about the wonders of New York City, the gold I would acquire there, the happiness that was not attainable in Mother Italy. While I loved my home, my family, my friends, and my mother's cooking after a long day out in the fields, I wanted something different out of life. When I told my parents that I wanted to travel abroad, my mother cried. My father screamed about my lack of concern for her welfare, or his for that matter. They were an odd couple. My father 6 feet tall, thin as a rod, with a face thin as a pencil, with green eyes and straight, dirty blonde hair. My mother was the exact opposite. Short, plump, she had large, deep brown eyes, like fresh coffee without the cream, and tight curls the color of a raven in the night. Disclaimer, I'm not doing the Italian accent because I don't want it to come out sounding like something else. I've practiced it, and it ends up sounding like a mix of Brooklyn accent, Russian, and Israeli. So if you're reading along and you want to read it along to yourself into the Italian accent, by all means go ahead, but I'm just going to read in my regular voice. Okay, and here we go. You're going to tear this family apart, he screamed, shaking his hands in the air like a dictator. Our lives weren't easy, and leaving wasn't exactly going to make things easier. This family is already falling apart, I shouted back. Marco, watch your tongue, my mother interjected. It was a hard time for all of us. My mother's brother had recently died, leaving a widow and 3 children in the care of my parents since they were the only living relatives. My siblings had long abandoned hope of living life outside of the 4 walls of my parents' house. I was determined to be the one to prove them wrong. It was a life I could not bear to live, a death I would not die. They could not understand, and I had no patience to explain it to them. What exactly do you have in America, huh? A new life? A new start? What about us, Marco? What about our fresh start? My mother asked, a pleading look in her eyes. She knew as well as I did that there would never be a chance for them to escape from the terror that their life had become. Mama, I need to get away from this life, I pleaded. Please understand me. Which life? My father asked. Your life, Papa. I cannot live your life, I said slowly. I caught my tongue too late. I held my breath, awaiting his harsh words. His face suddenly turned somber, as if he understood what I was saying. After a moment, however, his face became hard as a rock, his thin face squeezing in anguish. Ah, that's what this is about, huh? Well then, Marco, you can go. I'm not stopping you. Leave. Goodbye. He marched out of the room, mad as hell. He didn't speak to me again for a month and a half, and then only to inform me that he had arranged for me to live with his Uncle Petri in New York. Petri ran a general store and needed a big, strong Italian to lug the heavy boxes. My parents were not happy with my decision, but once I had the idea set in my head, there was no stopping me. On September 6, 1960, I hugged my mom goodbye, shook my father's hand, warned my siblings to behave themselves, turned and loaded the boat that would take me to freedom. Some freedom it brought me, too. My great-uncle Petri came to fetch me upon my arrival 16 days after I set sail. I was exhausted. I was underfed, having lost weight on the journey. I felt as if the life had been sucked out of me when Petri looked me up and down, shook my head, and grunted, "You're not the strong man I expected. Only a child." I'm 21, sir, I muttered quietly. Like I said, a child. Petri had been in his late 50s then. He looked exactly like my grandfather. Tall, though his age had caused him to slouch, broad, though his broadness lay in a deteriorating state, wide, though he looked wider due to the slouch. He was dressed like an American, I like an Italian. Two worlds crossed and set together, old and young, wise and unworldly. I moved into Petri's apartment, which he shared with his wife Martha, a German woman who he had met in New York, and their son Hugo. Such a strange family they were. I fit right in. I never had much of anything to say to them. We remained strangers sharing a communal bathroom, kitchen, and living room. Other than that, I was on my own. Petri was fluent in German, spoke to his wife and child in German only, and I, who barely understood the English language, could hardly take it upon myself to strain even more. 6 days later, we met. I was returning to the apartment after a long day of exploring. I was drained to the bone. The short walk around the neighborhood had wiped the life out of me. I could not believe how difficult it was to take a simple stroll around the park, with all the cars everywhere and the overpopulated sidewalks. Italy and New York were so different in nature, it was hard for the first week not to be convinced that I had moved to a completely different planet. People in New York had no time. They were always busy running errands, throwing parties, trying to hail a cab, which in itself can take all day if you're not skilled in the art of whistling and throwing your arms around like a monkey. If you stop moving for even a moment, you get walked over and flattened onto the sidewalk. I sluggishly climbed the stairs to the fourth floor, dragging my feet behind the rest of my body, looking up at the obstacle above me in frustration. I reached the fourth floor and was making a sharp turn towards my apartment door when I was cut off by a force of life that zipped past me. She was running after her cat. At least, it looked like a cat, bony, small, and ridiculously fast. She reached the end of the hallway, turned sharply to her right, and continued running. I glanced in the direction of her apartment door, which she had left wide open. She was having a gathering of some sort, and there was loud music blaring out into the hallway and loud chatter. A small group of people had huddled together in a clump outside of the door, smoking and looking drunk, glassy-eyed and unfocused, though well turned out. I shrugged, looked back for the mysterious woman, who was nowhere in sight, and continued towards my apartment. Just as I was about to enter the apartment, a voice cut me dead in my tracks. "I got it!" It was the orange-haired girl, carrying the skinny, sickly cat in her long, shapely arms. I smiled. Of course, she was not talking to me, but to her guests. I realized I was staring when they pointed at me and giggled. She turned around to face me, gave me a wave with her unoccupied arm, and skipped into her apartment. I was glued in place, completely captivated by the bombshell that had just walked past me. I leaned in my apartment door and smiled like a schoolboy who had just been awarded a prize. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, took them out, and managed to slide one into the keyhole. As I was about to unlock it, the door swung open and I fell through, landing at my uncle's feet. I looked up in embarrassment. I barely had time to collect my thoughts before Martha called out from the living room. "Where have you been, Marco? Dinner was a half hour ago. This is not like you, sweetheart," she concluded in her broken English. Yeah, not doing the German accent either. Okay, just want to make that clear. After 7 years of living in the United States, you'd have thought that she'd learned proper English. I was taking a walk, I mumbled as I rose from the floor. My uncle didn't say a word, just stared at me. Val, she said, are you hungry, darling? I can make you something to eat. I thought about it but declined and went straight to the room I had shared with Hugo. He was 10, had blonde hair, blue eyes, square features, and a permanent scowl on his face. When I opened the door, he was on the floor playing with makeshift action figures. They couldn't afford to buy him real toys, so Petrie fashioned some out of cardboard and tape. As much as he complained and whined about his lack of entertainment, Hugo was always fixed on those toys. Hi, Hugo, I said, as I dropped my bag. Hello, Marco, he snapped. Hugo wasn't my biggest fan. I had tampered with his territory, an unforgivable act that he reminded me of constantly. He felt as if I had taken his place in the family. Where he had come up with such an idea I never understood, although I did do my best to allay his feelings, which usually made things worse. Mama! Mama! Marco's going to sleep and it's only 6, Hugo yelled at the top of his lungs. I groaned. It's okay. Let him sleep, she called back. I shut my eyes, allowing sleep to overcome me. I had just become comfortable when I felt a poke at my back. I ignored it. Another poke followed. I turned over. Another one. I turned over. This time on my stomach. Then a shove. I opened my eyes, frustrated. Hugo was standing over me, stick in hand, staring me down. What do you want, Hugo? I snapped. Why are you so strange? What do you mean? I asked, furious. You're going to sleep when the sun's still out. Well, Hugo, I'm sorry to disturb you in your playtime, but please, let me sleep, I said, shutting my eyes. No! Hugo screamed suddenly. I will not be told how to behave by a stranger in my own bedroom! I looked at him in shock, sat up, rubbed my hands over my tired, aching eyes. Hugo, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Mama! Hugo screamed. I groaned. Mama! Marco hit me! I did no such thing, I yelled back. This kid was becoming less likable by the second. I climbed off the mattress I called home, opened the door, and stormed into the living room, ready for battle. But my opponent was tired from a long day at work and had no patience for bickering between a child and a man. Sometimes, Petrie said, looking at me sadly, I cannot tell if Hugo is a child or you are. I resented that. I blamed my relatives' ignorance and lack of parenting skills, but as my days with them wore on, I began increasingly to understand Hugo's multicultural frustration and the lack of tools to solve his problems with. It was a frustration I shared. My first year in America passed quickly, the days moving faster than I could keep up. The world was turning at a breakneck pace. My feet could barely keep up with the sidewalk that was constantly in motion beneath me. Yet, nothing happened. I did not make many friends. I spent most of my days discovering the world that I had been thrown into. Even now, when I think about it, I cannot understand how I survived that year in New York. There were times I felt that if I stayed there, I would fall apart. As much as I had wanted to get away from my home, it now seemed much more appealing than the four walls of Petrie's humble abode. A year to the day that I moved in, I decided to find my own place and begin living my own life. I had had enough of bickering with Hugo for a few moments of peace. I had acquired enough money to rent a decent apartment. It only seemed fair for all of us that I moved out. Martha did not see it as fair at all. There will be no such thing, she exclaimed when I told her my plans. I had just returned from a long day at work. Petrie was still at the store, and Hugo had gone to a friend's house after school. She was in the kitchen, making dinner. When I appeared, and she almost when I appeared, she almost dropped the pan of strudel she was making. It was a good thing there was a counter separating us, or she would have reached her stubby little arm over and slapped me with a spatula in her hand. But Martha, I need to become more independent, I complained, realizing I had had just the same argument with my own family. The fight for independence I thought I had already won. Independent? Look at me! I'm almost 50 years old, Marco, and I was nowhere near as independent as you were when I was your age, she screamed, flailing her hands. She knocked over a container of sugar that crashed to the tile floor and shattered. See, Marco? Do you see what this is doing to my nerves? After I've cared for you and fed you, do you really want to do this to me? She knelt down to pick up the pieces. I could hear her crying. I'm 22 years old. You can't honestly expect me to live with you forever. Martha, this apartment isn't big enough for all of us, I grumbled. I jumped over the counter to help her. Oh, for goodness sakes, she said. Take a piece of straw, calm your nerves down, and knock some self into yourself. She lifted herself off the floor with the glass in her hand and heaved her hands into the trash, as if to rid herself not only of the sharp pieces, but the anxiety attack she was suffering. Let us wait until your uncle arrives. I am sure he will agree with me, she told me. Now, get out of my kitchen and let me finish preparing your nourishment, you ungrateful child. My face shot up and I stared at her. The last thing I wanted to do was yell at Martha. I pulled myself together quickly and made my way to the door. Where are you going? She demanded. Dinner is almost ready. I'm making your favorite. I shut the door behind me and sank onto the hallway carpet, my head against the door, my feet stretched out before me, and I closed my eyes. Excuse me? Would you mind moving your feet? I'm a strong believer in superstition, and if you do not move, I might cause you to stop growing, although I don't believe that would be a problem in your case. What are you, 5'11"? The voice caught me in its grip. I peeked with one eye at the body that accompanied it. A tall, skinny creature with a fiery set of thick, curly locks was peering down at me, her eyes smiling at my ridiculous appearance. She was carrying 6 heavy-looking grocery bags, 3 in each hand. Okay, that's where we're going to stop for today. So that was page 24. So next week we will continue with the second half of chapter 2. We're also going to be doing a live discussion when we are done with chapter 2 about Marco and Andrea's relationship, but I can't give you any more information because that would be spoiling the chapter. Okay, so that is it for now. Hope you enjoyed. If you do not already own your own copy of Shattered Illusions and would like to, the links for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and my website are all in the down there. You'll find them. The link to my website has a PayPal link for signed copies. Yeah. Okay, everybody. This has been fun. I'll see you all later. Bye.